Okay, and we are live.
All right.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's first Google Hangout. This will be a session about Google Analytics. It will be an introduction section. We are running as part of the special interest group, Data and Insights. I am Elena, data analyst at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I have here with me Brian Alpert.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you.
Who works as a web analyst and SEO analyst at the Smithsonian. So we will be running the session together, and I'm going to share my screen so you can see the slides. Just a second. Okay, I think you can see them now. And before we start also, I would like, well, first to thank Brian for joining me this workshop. We've done a few workshops together, and it has worked really well. And also would like to thank Ryan, who is the Digital Engagement Coordinator of MCN, for helping me to set up this Google Hangout. And also Trilce Navarrete, who is the chair with me of the Data and Insights Special Interest Group. So what we are going to see today in this session, first we're going to do a quick introduction to digital analytics, covering some of the basics. Then we will go through some of the main Google Analytics reports. Then we will go to some important strategic elements, like Brian is going to talk about how to set up targets and goals, so then you can define your metrics. We will talk about different Google Analytics features that includes segmentation, custom reports, event tracking, views and filters, dashboards, and then we will put some slides with resources and tools you can always access. We will be sharing these slides on Basecamp after the session, so you can always go back to them if there is anything you missed or you would like to see in detail. There are different links included in these slides. We hope to leave at least like 10 minutes for Q&A, so you can send us questions. You can do that via the Google Hangout, or you can also tweet with the hashtag MuseData, and we will be looking at that Twitter stream. So we are going to focus today on a specific tool, Google Analytics. This is one of the tools you may use to evaluate the success of your website or your mobile app. There are different range of methods, and just to put it in context with other methodologies and tools you may use, you have from qualitative methods to quantitative methods, then you have those attitudinal methods, and then behavioral. So digital analytics is mainly quantitative and analyzing user behavior. So the main things you can do with Google Analytics, Google Analytics is just a snippet of JavaScript you put on all your website pages or on your app. And basically what we can do are four main things. Here you have a diagram which follows, as we will see later, the structure of the different reports on Google Analytics. We can look at who our audiences are. We can look at number of visits, some data about demographics, their online behavior. And that is very useful, and we will talk later about this, to create different segments to analyze your data. Then on Google Analytics, we get a series of reports about where people are coming from. If they're coming from Google, if they're coming from another website, typing directly your URL, or from one of your campaigns. Then Google Analytics also provide us with information about what is the content that our users are visiting on the website. We get information about number of page views, what are the key areas people have visited, user flow, what people are searching on the site. And that is very important to test and customize and improve your site and your user experience. And finally, there are reports about conversion, and you can have like e-commerce transactions, like ticket sales, membership, subscriptions, donations, but you can have also a series of goals which are not necessarily transactional, and you can see whether your users are converting in terms of commenting on your blog, sharing your content on social media, downloading maybe a teacher's pack, and so on. And we use these reports to optimize processes, create funnels, seeing if there are any dropouts, and optimize that workflow. So when you open Google Analytics, this is basically the screen you get. On the left-hand side, you have the links to the different type of reports, and we'll go through the main ones in a second. You have the title of the report, and at the top also of your screen, you will see the data range. You can change that and select a different period and compare that to a previous period or previous year. Then if you go down, you will see in your screen different options to share your report, like via email, PDF. You can create dashboards directly from these reports. Then you will have an option to add different segments, so you can filter and analyze your data based on your segments. You have a chart with the metric you have selected. By default, when you open Google Analytics, is sessions, but you can change that metric that is represented in the chart and analyze the trend of that metric. And then normally below that chart, you have the different metrics that for each report. Basically, on Google Analytics, you have dimensions and metrics. Dimensions are those attributes or characteristics of an object that has different values. An object meaning, for example, location. So then you have a dimension, a city or a country. Key dimensions include, for example, visitor type, location, language, device, products, search term, and so on. And then for those dimensions, we have the metrics, so the elements of that dimension that can be measured. So here in the slide, I included some definitions coming from Google Analytics of some of the main metrics you will find in almost every report. So the main ones where we need to make a difference is between users, who measures the unique number of unique users that visit your site during a certain time period, and then sessions, which is defined as the period of consecutive activity by the same user. And by default, a session stops after the user has been inactive for 30 minutes. Then here included as well average session duration, average pages per session, or bounce rate, which are important, like, for example, to analyze traffic sources or behavior on pages. I would like to highlight, for example, bounce rate, which is the percentage of people that come to your site, see just one page, and then leave your site. For all those metrics, there are things, I mean, they sound quite self-explanatory, but there are things to take into account. For example, the way Google measures time on site or time on a page, because it doesn't count the time people spend on the last page. And that's very important to understand these metrics. So they are not like 100% accurate, but when you use it to compare segments, when you use it to compare different traffic sources or the effectiveness of a page, these are metrics you use to make comparisons, although they are not representing exactly how much time people have spent on those pages on your website. So now let's going to start having a look at the different reports. The first one, and following that diagram I showed before, the audience report. These reports give you insights about your users. They provide information about the volume of your audience, like visits or users. you have access, and in this report on the left-hand side, you can see, for example, and the demographics and interest, which you will need to activate if you want to have access to these reports and change a bit of your code. But then by default, you can see, for example, your user's language, the language of their browser, their location, then if they are like new or returning visitors, their engagement, frequency of visiting. And then there are very important reports in terms of mobile usage and technology.
I'll be right out.
And the next set of reports are related to acquisition, so how your users get to your site or access your mobile app. And this is important to understand the behavior, then also when they are on the website and if they convert. So those are the main objectives of this set of reports. Here we have the main the main channels are here. So we have organic search, so people searching on Google. Then we have direct traffic, which includes people typing directly your URL, on copying and pasting a URL on the browser. And sometimes it includes what is called like dark social or some other traffic that is not campaign tag or comes directly, like for example, from an email that is not tagged. And then we have referrals, so people coming from other sites, then social media, email, and also you will find information about your campaigns. One thing to highlight here is that, Google removed the information about the keywords people were typing on Google to access, before they access your website. But now you can link it to the Google Search Console, previously known as the Webmaster Tools. And actually there you can find quite a lot of information about different queries, the volume of impressions, and clicks to your website. Then we have the behavior reports, and that includes like information about the content that your user has visited. So you have a list of pages they've seen, including their page views, bounce rate, exit rate, entrances, and so on. In these reports as well, you find information about the landing pages. So what are the first pages like people visited on your site? And you find some technical reports like site speed, so you can optimize how long your pages take to load. And there are reports about site search, so you can see the percentage of people that made a search on your website and see those search terms. In order to see this information, you need to go to your admin page and configure this, adding your query parameter. So for example, Q or search term. You will find that in your URL after you type. And then here, a very important report as well are the events report. And we will talk later about tracking events, but here, for example, you can find data about events you have set up on your site, such as downloads, email subscriptions, social media search, and so on. And finally, the other set of reports, the main set of reports are reports related to conversions. So seeing whether people have completed a specific activity on your site. It could be, as I mentioned before, a transactional activity like a ticket purchase or a membership subscription, but it could be as well non-transactional. So for example, downloads or email subscriptions or comments on your blog. For those e-commerce activities, you will find a lot of information about the products people have purchased, and total revenue, the average order value, conversion rate, abandonment rate, and so on. And then other reports you have on Google Analytics at the top is RealTime Reports, which you can find like different widgets and about all the reports we have just seen, and you can see in real time what people are doing on your website. Just to mention very quickly before we move to the next section, Brian and I ran a similar workshop a couple of weeks ago at Museums on the Web. And one of the things that came up during that workshop is the version you have of Google Analytics on your site. It's very important to migrate, if you haven't done that, to Universal Analytics. This is the latest version of Google Analytics. And now Google is only developing new features for Universal Analytics. And what they have said, although they haven't announced a date, is that at one point they will disconnect the old code and they will not longer support it. I mean, they said that from that day that they announced it, they will leave a couple of years, but it's good to be able to access the new reports already to migrate to Universal Analytics. In order to do that, you can use Google Tag Manager to do that, but basically the only thing you have to do is just replace the code. And if you have any e-commerce activities and event tracking, you will need to update them so they work with Universal Analytics. Google has a page called the Upgrade Center where you can follow the updates. It has some information about how to upgrade to the new code. And hopefully at one point they will announce the date that they will do the switch. If you don't know which version of Google Analytics you have, you can use a tool like Google Tag Assistant in order to check which version of Google Analytics you have.
Okay. Hey, Elena, are you still with us?
Yeah,
Elena, are you still with us?
Yes, I just noticed, and I mean, looking at the screen, and also I just got a message that the PowerPoint goes a bit later than what I'm saying. So yeah, we may need to wait for the slide to come up.
Okay. Okay. Also, I have I might take my earbuds out because I have a pretty significant echo. Oh no, it's gone now. Good. All right. All right, thank you guys. There's always some technical fun involved with Google Hangouts. So we're looking at a slide of the totally unimpressed Kanye West, and really the web analytics process is often kind of like this for people. Like you see lots of dashboards with lots of measurements, and some of those measurements are being measured just because they can be measured. And so, and the end result is, so what? I mean, what does this really mean in terms of the program and the things that we're trying to accomplish? I mean, you have this really powerful tool, but how does it relate to what you're actually trying to accomplish with your website or your social media program? So go ahead to the next slide, Elena. Web analytics is really about helping you further your program's goals. It's just a tool that you can use, but really it should be all about your program and what you're trying to accomplish and accomplishing the goals, the things that you've really set out to do, and understanding if you're doing those things successfully, and also understanding if you need to change things up because you're not, what can you do, what can you measure to understand, you know, the tactics you're trying to implement. Go to the next slide. So the kind of thing that enables you to be effective in using web analytics, especially when you're trying to communicate your program to your managers or to any other audience, really, is to use this data to help you tell a story. It's just something that makes everything you do much more effective. I have this template here for a kind of a typical kind of story, but there's really many ways data can be used to tell a story. But a kind of a template for a common thing to do is you talk about what was happening. You talk about what you thought that meant. You talk about the changes that you made, and looking at the data, you can tell what's happening now. Next slide. And the good thing about this is that there's a systematic step-by-step process to enable you to use these tools. I'm going to go through each of these individually, but running down the whole thing. You articulate your program's goals. You talk about strategies to achieve those goals. You decide on tactics to drive the strategies. And really only at this point you start talking about what to measure. What are you going to use Google Analytics actually for? And your measurements validate your tactics. And understanding what is normal is another really important part of the process. And benchmarks is what that means. Understanding what is really normal. You can't set targets for what's good until you know what normal is. Next slide. So this first slide is about the first part of the process, articulating specific goals. And that's really, you're just trying to express what you're trying to accomplish. A lot of times our institutions have goals that are too broad to really be measured. I'm going to use an example from one of the units at the Smithsonian, and their goal was to increase influence. Well, that's a great goal, to increase the influence of their unit, but it's really too broad. It's too hard to measure. So we worked with them and their management to make that goal a little bit more specific and more measurable. And what we ended up with was the goal become the definitive source on Smithsonian history, which is a much more measurable kind of thing. Definitive is a little bit tough when you're talking about the definitive anything, but measuring Smithsonian history and how they are able to be an authority in that's something we can do. And when you make them more specific, what happens is that it makes it much easier to identify the strategies and tactics you're going to use. The last bullet there is really an important one that I stress over and over. You don't want to do too many. It's really easy to sit down with your management and walk out of the meeting with a list of 20 goals, but that's just too many. You don't have time or the resources to pursue that many. So just a few, like a handful, like maybe 3. The next step in determining your strategies and tactics, the strategies are the plans you make to achieve your goals, like employing social media. That's a strategy. The tactics are the specific things that you do to drive the strategy forward. So a specific type of content, in terms of my example, Smithsonian history, that kind of content, that's a tactic. Using individual channels like social media channels like Facebook or Twitter, those are real specific tactics. If you're talking about specific tools or really specific things that you're going to use, those are typically tactics. In terms of my example, the goal was to become the definitive source on Smithsonian history. Well, the strategy that we decided on was to increase engagement with the history of the Smithsonian content that they have on their website. The tactic that we chose was to make that content on the website more findable and more measurable. Next slide. So deciding how to measure your tactics, this is where measurement actually comes in once you've identified those tactics. Again, it's really important. You only need to choose a few of these. You have this incredibly powerful tool with many measurements. You really only want to use a few because you're trying to tell a story that's easily understandable, and you also, because of your own resources, you don't have time to try to track 20 measurements. The other important thing to do with measurements is that you trend them over time, and you can kind of see it on a chart here. This is about, I think, maybe 13 months worth of data. So looking at the data over time is a really important part of understanding how you're doing. So looking again at our example, we're going to look at a specific way that the measurement was employed. The tactic was to make the content more findable and more measurable. So what we did, we looked at engagement metrics relating to that history content. Because remember, we're trying to see if the people were engaged with Smithsonian history content. And then typical engagement metrics are frequency, how often people you visit your website, and the depth into your website that they go, how many pages did they look at, and then the bounce rate, which Elena talked about. What percentage of the time do people come to your website and just bounce off without really doing anything? And the chart that we have on the right is a chart that relates to a really specific part of visit depth, the deep history visits, as we were calling them. So these are the people that we made a segment of just the history content on their website. And these are the people that were most engaged with that content. And they're compared to the people that were most engaged with all of their content. So you have two lines. The bottom line is blue. That's all of the visits, and it's all of the people who are looking at 20 or more pages of their website, really engaged, but with the entire website. And then the top line is just those history-related visits, the people who are only looking at history-type content for 20 or more pages over the course of a month. And as you can see, that those so-called deep history visits were 94% higher than that same segment of people looking at the rest of the website. So they were able to kind of tell the story that the people visiting our website are much more highly engaged with our history content, and they're able to make the case that they were being successful in terms of becoming more of an authority on Smithsonian history. Next slide. So benchmarking is really important because once, as I said before, you don't know what normal is. You can't set targets for what you want to be good at until you understand what is really normal. And to do that, you need months of data. I say 6 months because data is seasonal and it depends on your traffic, but that's just kind of my opinion, really. When Elena and I did the workshop the other day, somebody made the very good point that especially with their museum, you know, seasonal traffic was summertime, and you can only measure, you know, if you're going to want to compare summertime traffic, you have to compare to a year ago. So it really depends on your particular circumstance, how many months of data that you really need. Another thing that's really important to do is that you balance the targets with the factors beyond your control. If you're trying to achieve really difficult things, you're going to need to allow more time, and you're also going to need to allow more resources. And if you don't have the resources, well, you're going to have to understand, you know, what can you really do? One of the things I'm trying to, goal examples that I use is if you're trying to become more findable and you're a photography website and you're trying to become the first page of Google for the term photography, that's probably too difficult to achieve. So you have to understand whether or not you're setting realistic targets. Next slide. This is just kind of a summary and a reminder to keep it simple. And again, to not do too much, because the people I work with, and if you're in that same situation, you only have really limited resources, and maybe you're wearing more than one hat in your job. So you have to set this program for the amount of time that you have. And that includes minimizing the number of measurements you're going to track. It's really easy to try to track too many. As time goes by, and if these measurements that you've chosen turn out to be inconclusive, that happens. So don't be afraid to change things, because it's really an ongoing process. Next slide. So the next slide is talking about something that is kind of inevitable for most of us. I am no exception to this. I call it quantity of stuff. And it's the kind of things that you're typically measuring, and you're typically measuring these things to satisfy your boss. Large numbers of sessions, how many users did we have last month, how many pages or page views did people look at? Well, those are good things to track in terms of the scope and the context of what you're doing. I mean, if you have a really huge website, tracking those big numbers puts you in context with other big websites, or conversely, if you don't have a big website, it helps you, you know, understand where you fit in the scheme of things. So it's good in that respect, but there's really no actionable data that you can discern from these kinds of things. You cannot improve your website or your program just by tracking these large quantity of stuff kinds of things. And also reporting these numbers out of context can actually be misleading and can put you in a bit of a hole. Let's say you went viral with a particular social media post last month, and all of a sudden traffic soared. Well, that's great. So you had an enormous amount of traffic that month, but you have to explain exactly why, because that traffic is going to go away in a couple months. And without the context that you've already set up, you're just going to be putting yourself in a bad spot. So the context of these numbers is really important too, and it's one of the things that they actually do pretty well. There's a little quote there on the right from one of the leading voices in web analytics, Mr. Avinash Kaushik. Avinash is most quotable as saying, all data in aggregate, this kind of data is crap. So take that for what you will. Next slide. So another thing that frequently happens when working with the kinds of people I work with, or the kinds of people in running programs that you may be interfacing with, is that they've already done some stuff and they come back to you for validation. This is also kind of a typical scenario, but that can work out really well. But it also means you're in the position of having to look through data from the past and see what's already occurred and see if it actually can make sense in terms of the things that your customers were doing. In this case, it worked out pretty well. I work with the folks over at the Smithsonian Archives of American Art, and they wanted to make their content more accessible to younger students. Now, they have a very particular kind of website. It's very much a professional researcher website. So it wasn't that easy to use for high school or college kids. So what they decided was, we're going to take our content and put it on Wikipedia, and we think that's going to help these people find our content and better understand our content. So in a way, they were kind of undergoing a strategy of making of people having to visit their site less. So that's not completely intuitive, especially to managers. But they made this sale to their managers, and they tried to do this. And what we did, we measured the chart on the right to see if it was working. And what you have there is one of these engagement metrics, visit frequency, how often people were coming to the website over time. And we had two segments of users. The first one is the all visits, everybody visiting their website. That's in a segment of high frequency visitors. They were coming more than 10 times per month. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to look a little close. I think it's actually more like 19 times per month. So that's something who's really coming a lot. You compare the exact same segment of people referred from Wikipedia, this high visit segment, and you can see that over time it's going down, and going down rather dramatically. So that was kind of telling their story that they were really successful in doing this. The people that were having to come to their site very frequently from Wikipedia was going down over time, meaning that those people were they're finding what they need on Wikipedia. So that's what they were using to help kind of confirm that what they had done had worked. Next slide. So this is kind of the bottom line in terms of using your measurements. Your measurements validate your tactics. That's what you're really trying to do with these measurements, you know, or not, but hopefully they do. To work in this process and improve your site, you really need kind of data that is meaningful in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. These engagement metrics, I think, are very useful in terms of the people I work with. Segmentation, we're going to talk about that as a very important part of this, because it enables you to identify real specific segments of your audience. We're also going to talk about goals and conversion rates, a very important part of this program. I don't think we're talking so much about A/B testing, because it's not so much a Google Analytics thing, but that's another part of something that's really important, especially if you're launching a new website and you're trying to understand a better layout or a better design. And then, of course, this is not a presentation about qualitative data like surveys or satisfaction surveys, but that also is a really important part of a web analytics program. And if your goal is purely audience acquisition, or you're trying to grow, you're a new website and you're just trying to get more people, well, this quantity of stuff, the kind of metrics that I talked about, you can use that to tell your story, but that's kind of the only circumstance that you can really use that stuff as a really effective storytelling measurement. Next slide. So segmentation. I think segmentation is arguably the most powerful feature of Google Analytics. Right out of the box, you can do so much with this thing. You analyze subsets of traffic, and a lot of these things are built right into Google Analytics, so you don't have to do anything at all to make use of them. Things like search engine visits, or visits from social media, or the demographics of people coming to your website. Segments are accessed from this little pull-down menu that you see encircled in red at the top of the audience overview report. We don't have the time to go into the great detail about adding and removing them and editing them and creating them, but it's not too hard, let me tell you, and you can definitely do it. And there's a lot of really good resources on the web in terms of creating and using segments. And the 4 links on this slide are just examples, but there's some pretty good ones, and they definitely will get you started understanding and using segmentation. Next slide. User segments are a specific kind of segments that are fairly new in the last couple of years to Google Analytics. So, and it was a big step forward when they introduced this. It's the Google Analytics' best guess of an anonymous person and all of the data associated with a user or a group of users. They have a couple of built-in ones. You can look at the segments of single visit users in terms of all people who visited in the time period only one time, so maybe not very successful or highly engaged visitors, or the multi-user visitors, or users rather, the other part of that where people are coming back and visiting your site multiple times. The other thing you can do in the user segments is create your own, so you can get very specific in terms of the kinds of things that you're looking for. The examples I cite are users in Massachusetts who spent greater than $100 if you're an e-commerce website, or something that might be more pertaining to museums doing social media. Facebook mobile users who stayed greater than 30 seconds. So those are really specific stuff that you can program in the user segments. Next slide. And there are different types of user segments that are built into GA. They're all under the new segment area. When you go to create a new segment, you can make user segments involving demographics, sources of traffic. If you're running an e-commerce website, those are the examples that I just cited on the previous slide. And then conditions and sequences are a little bit more advanced. But if you're diving into some of these articles and research tools, they talk all about the kinds of things you can do with special conditions of segments and special sequences of people using the website. Next slide. Custom reports are also something that is something you can do easily in Google Analytics that can save you a lot of time and trouble, especially if you have to do the same kinds of things and report the same kind of data every month. If you look at the little red circle there is encircling a part of Google Analytics that says customization. So clicking on that will get you to the custom reports area. You can create your own custom reports, but GA has this thing called the gallery that Google has introduced, and there are tons of custom reports, and actually there's lots of segments there too. Many of these things are created by experts, and maybe they're blogging about it, and you can they'll give you a link, and you could just go click on the link and import all of the custom reports that they've created and already discussed. So you don't really have to become an expert in programming these things yourself to use them. There are a lot of really, really good ones out there. And as you can see, there's a few good links on the slide that talk about custom reports. Another good thing in terms of saving you time, if you get a custom report that your manager wants to see or any group of people want to work with, you can schedule these things to be delivered every month by email. They show up in the email as a PDF with the data for the last month on there, and that's just something you don't have to do. So it's a really powerful tool for saving yourself time and money, and also disseminating data to an audience. There's a little bit of a note there that says, go back, yeah, I just want to mention this for 1 second. It's possible in custom reports to make reports that have dimensions and metrics that are not well inclined to each other. They're mismatched. An example for that might be the conversion rate for a particular page. We don't really have time today to go into why a session level metric or session level dimension like conversion rate or metric like conversion rate is not appropriate for a page or a page view. But it's something that I would encourage people to look at and understand when they're using Google Analytics. You can make reports that look really reasonable, but the data itself is actually not well suited. It's one of the ways that Google Analytics power can tend to backfire. It's an important topic, but it's something that we could spend a lot more time than we have today talking about. I just wanted to mention it so people would be aware. Okay, next slide, Elena. Event tracking is something else that we mentioned too. Really important, but a bit of customization and a bit more of an advanced application in Google Analytics. The more sophisticated goals that you're trying to achieve using GA typically involve creating these things called events. It might be things like measuring external links or measuring signups to email newsletters or the forms that people have submitted. Even measuring PDF, a really basic function on most websites, is something that's measured by event tracking. It's something you have to kind of do. It doesn't come out of the box with Google Analytics generally, although there are some really simple kinds of events that you can program without really having to do any coding. But generally, the more powerful events involve coding. It's a process you have to go through. I will say it's not really that complicated. It can be intimidating to people because it involves code, but it's actually, trust us, it's not as complicated as that, and there's a lot of really good resources on the web about creating and using events, and it's a process of going through and defining things and categorizing things. So it's something that you can do. So I would look more into event tracking and what it really means. You can also use Google Tag Manager, which we'll talk about today, to do events more automatically. So that's one of the powerful features of Tag Manager that we'll talk about too. Next slide. I think Elena's going to take over here now. We're going to talk a little bit about specific views and filters.
Yeah, so another important thing when you start with Google Analytics is to set up your Google Analytics account correctly. And one thing that really helps in order to run different type of reports is to create a series of views, or previously called profiles, on your account. And in those profiles, basically what you do is to add a range of filters, so you can separate some traffic. It is very important. I mean, by default, you get an unfiltered version view on your profile. It is very important to keep that unfiltered view, so you can always, if you made a mistake creating one of those filters, you can go back to this unfiltered view and see the data. Then you can create, for example, a main profile where you exclude things like internal traffic, or you can add filters to clean up your content reports, or lowercase, like your campaign name, so everything looks a bit more clean when you run a report. You can add, for example, an spam filter. This is an increasing problem on Google Analytics. There is like more websites, unfortunately, sending spam. So there are filters created to remove that traffic. Another profile you can add as a main profile is if you have like different microsites or subdomains, is to have one where you show in the content reports the full URL. And it's very useful, for example, to then, like in the content report, get traffic to the different sections of your site. Other views that you may want to create on Google Analytics may be related to specific sections of your website or microsites. So, for example, you can create one for your online collection, your blog, and so on. Then other views that can help you to kind of segment your users and analyze in detail the data is to create, for example, a view of users using your website at the museum. And you can do that filter using your IP address or the name of your Wi-Fi. If you want to analyze, for example, traffic from different devices, I mean, you can always use segments, but if you need to run reports on regular basis, do some automation. And sometimes there is a challenge on Google Analytics with segments of sampling. I mean, it creates sometimes samples of your data instead of giving your whole data set. So sometimes it's useful to create specific views if you need to run regular reports for some specific data. For example, if you're running an SEO project, you may want to create a view just with organic traffic. So you can just look at those users coming from search engines. I added here, I mean, we don't have time to go through all of them, but we will share the slides later. And also, I noticed the screen resolution is not great on YouTube. So here you have some examples and information about how you can create specific filters. So for example, as I mentioned before, one filter to include or exclude an IP address. It may be useful to exclude internal traffic, or just to include traffic of those users using your Wi-Fi at the museum. Here is an example of a filter for a specific website section. So basically, you do this using your URL, so you include the traffic only to a specific subdirectory. And here's an example of how to create a filter just for mobile traffic. So you do a filter like selecting include and then selecting the type of device. Brian talked before about custom reports, which are very useful if you have to run some reports on a regular basis. Another way to get information on a regular basis from Google Analytics is to create dashboards. This is the first thing you get at the top of your reports. And just in general, here are some considerations if you are thinking about building a dashboard. So, of course, a very important part that we've talked during this session, how you select the metrics. Then you may want to think about that type of dashboard you want to create, maybe a strategic dashboard that offers an overview to senior management staff, or maybe you need a more tactical and operational one with a lot of detail that can help you to improve your daily activity. Then automation on how you update your dashboard is very important. Google has a very good API, so there are different tools in the market and also free that connect directly to the Google Analytics API, and then you can create dashboards based on that. We'll talk about a couple of examples at the end of this presentation. Then you want to think about maybe sharing options, if it's an internal dashboard, if it's an external one, who needs access to it. Then the frequency of updates, the different data sources, and different type of widgets you may want to add to this dashboard. And then, of course, all the visual part, like the user interface, the design, and including your museum brand. So examples of Google Analytics dashboards you can create. You can, for example, create an overview report, an e-commerce one that only focuses on your mobile traffic, one only for social media, SEO, pay-per-click campaigns, one for your content or your online collection, and you can even create on Google Analytics a real-time dashboard. There are different ways to create these dashboards. You can add from the menu like a new dashboard and then start adding widgets, or you can go to a Google Analytics report, and always at the top you have an option that says Add to Dashboard. So if there is a report that you find that is useful to check on a regular basis, you may want to add a few widgets to your main dashboard. So you just need to click that option. A good way to start creating dashboards is to go to the Google Analytics Solutions Gallery, where you can find like hundreds of dashboards that other people have created. You can filter them by type, by ranking, by author. And this is a good start to like copy the URL that they provide you, upload that dashboard to your Google Analytics account, and then make changes to fit your reporting needs. Once you create your dashboard, you have options to share it with people in your team. So you can share it with people that have access to Google Analytics. And if that is not the case, you have options to download it on PDF or create an automated report that is sent on a regular basis directly from Google Analytics. Here we have included a slide with different resources and tools that we have mentioned and we have linked to as well. And we really recommend some of these blogs and tools in order to get started on Google Analytics. And there's a lot of written out there, so if there is anything you specifically want to set up on your Google Analytics account, these are good places to check if there is information available. We included as well a slide with other tools you may want to use apart from Google Analytics to create your dashboards. The majority of them have direct connectors with Google Analytics, which simplifies the process and automates a lot of the work. We're gonna go quickly through some of them. And just to mention as well, one way of implementing Google Analytics and event tracking and e-commerce is using Google Tag Manager. Basically, you add this snippet of code to your site, and then from the Google Tag Manager interface, you can add different type of tags. So instead of depending on your development process, to add new code to your site related to tagging, you can use directly Google Tag Manager to add things like Google Analytics, event tracking, or third-party tags or custom HTML tags. So basically the way it works is that you select the tag and then you select mainly the trigger, that is when and where the tag will be activated. If you are doing some analytics implementation, there are some tools, free tools and add-ons that help you this implementation. For example, Omniback is quite useful to debug and check that everything is being tracked correctly. Brian, you may want to talk about the next ones.
Okay, yeah, Google Analytics Academy is free video courses that Google has put out that are specifically helping to understand not only Google Analytics, but also there's a Tag Manager fundamental, and there's a course about mobile app analytics too. I recommend these things. They're fairly basic, but I took all of them, and I've definitely learned stuff from each one for sure. You could, and Google is, as you know, if you've ever seen these things, they're very professionally done, and you can watch them, as many times as you want. None of them are very long. There are little self-help tests along the way that you can kind of use to understand, your knowledge of the material. So I recommend these kinds of things. Definitely, you can get some good materials and some good strategies for using the Google Analytics from taking these courses. Let's go to the next couple slides. We're going to talk a little bit about automation. There are a bunch of, well, I shouldn't say there's a bunch, there's a handful of Google Analytics automation tools out there. One that I've used fairly extensively is called Supermetrics. There are others that they basically do the same thing. It's a commercial tool. It's about $350 a year. So this is not really a commercial endorsement other than just to say that I've used this tool and it works really well. It's an Excel add-on. It's easy to use. I think all of these are pretty easy to use. Supermetrics has exceptional charting capabilities, and you can schedule these things to run automatically the way you can do it in Google as well. There's some documentation and support, but it's actually pretty limited. With a lot of these tools, you're sort of on your own, but as with anything, if you're paying for the tool, you can expect to get some greater level of support than with a free tool. Supermetrics also has a version for Google Sheets that's now available, free version. It's not as flexible, it's not as easy to use as the commercial tool for Excel, but it's not nothing, and it's you can actually do some things with it fairly easily. So I think that's worth checking out too, especially if you don't have a budget. But I've used Supermetrics pretty much for $350 a year. It's helped me a lot. So next slide. I made a dashboard that goes along with Supermetrics. I think also you could make the kind of custom dashboard like this with any of these tools. It's basically two spreadsheets working together. I won't go through an explanation of the entire thing right now, but I do have a pretty good case study on the next slide that shows some of the things you can do with this dashboard. The thing I like about the dashboard is that it enables me to take bits of data from Google Analytics and display it in ways that are more easily understandable than they are in the standard Google Analytics reports. So what this is about 8 months worth of data from one of our websites, and this is all of the visits visiting that website. And it's the visit frequency, the number of times per month people came to the site. The purple bar is the number of people that came, the percentage of people I should say that came once a month. The orange bar is like sort of a medium segment that's 2 to 9 times a month. And the blue bar is what we call high frequency or high loyalty people. They came greater than 9 times over the course of the month. And all of their visits tell a pretty nice story. The segments are fairly even. And then the good blue one is kind of trending upward. So that's kind of good. This case study is actually really a good example of how segmentation can really help you in Google Analytics and using in conjunction with a dashboard like this. If you go to the next slide, this is the exact same website, the exact same time frame, but now rather than looking at all of the visits, we're just looking at visits of people who came from search engines. So this is quite a different picture. You had 3 fairly flat trends, nice even trends before, and now you have the number of times people coming only once a month. In other words, the lowest loyalty visitors of all, that's trending up. And the orange one was flat before, the medium group, that's now trending down. And before you had that nice upward trend on the blue high frequency or high loyalty visitors, now that's kind of flat and maybe even down a little bit. So right at the end there. So what this told us was that this website was poorly targeted for search, and the kind of things people were searching for and finding the website were not the kinds of things that the website was really about. People were coming to the site and going, oh, this is really not what I expected. And over time, this problem was growing worse. And if you do have this kind of high bounce rate on your site from search engines, over time, your ranking scores in Google and the other search engines will go down. So it's good to identify this problem. And what it enabled them to do is kind of look at trying to understand the keywords for the site and what people were finding the site for, and try to retarget their site and refocus the best performing keywords for the things that people actually would be wanting to find on their website. So it's a good example of the dashboard, but also of segmentation in action. If we look at the next slide, it's actually a Google product that works with Google Sheets. It's free. It's a spreadsheet, the Google Sheets spreadsheet add-on for Google Analytics. It's not as flexible as the commercial tools. It's maybe a little bit harder to use, and you're kind of on your own in terms of figuring out how to use it, although there are some introductory videos, and we have links to those there on the slide. But at the same time, some of the things are, they're easy enough to figure out. You can definitely make use of them, and you can create some dashboards and visualizations without too much trouble. The thing I really like about this is that fourth bullet down, is that you can embed these visualizations on websites with an automatic refresh. So all you have to do is code a specific URL on your website, and if you want to display a piece of data in real time, you can do that with this tool quite easily. So I thought that was a pretty powerful tool. Once again, it's free, so the price is right. Go ahead, the next slide, Elena, that's fine. There's another Excel add-on. This isn't completely free, but it's pretty inexpensive. It's called Analytics Edge. It's also an Excel add-on. It's a pretty clean interface, but as with these others, you're kind of on your own figuring out how to use it. That's not to say it's really hard to use, because it's really not. But if you want to do more specific and more advanced kinds of things, you're going to have to spend some time trying to figure out how to get this to work. But you can do a lot of these same kinds of things: auto refresh and report scheduling, and the support that's really available is through an online community. So that's a little bit haphazard, but there is some kind of discussion about this out there, and people are often willing to jump in and help. And the cool thing about this is that you can import data from other sources like text files or other Excel worksheets or workbooks, and you can use that in conjunction with your Google Analytics data. So if you have some real specific need to do that, this can actually really be a powerful tool to make that happen. I think that's the last slide we have, and we were coming right up on the hour too. Elena, questions?
Yes. So yeah, I think we have the Q&A activated. I don't know if that is working. So I don't know, because I'm trying to look at a different screen and I don't see an option to add questions.
I have the chat open, but I don't see anything on it though. So I'm not sure if it's live or working.
Yeah, there is a different up here, which is Q&A, that in theory, I have it activated. So in theory, people should be able to ask questions, but I look at the screen and it's not working.
Oh, there it is, right?
Yeah, so I don't know if, you can send, maybe it's easier, like if people send any questions via Twitter.
We can certainly do that. Yeah, I've got the Q&A up too. I don't see anything. Well, that may just mean there isn't anything, but
yeah, but the thing is that when I try to send, I'm logged in a different screen with to check that it was working, and I don't see how to send a question here. So I don't know. We can always. One of the issues have been seeing the screen resolution of the PowerPoint. So we will upload it to Basecamp, and then if people have questions, they can put them there, and we can respond to those. We are both on that Basecamp.
Yeah, people can send us questions by Twitter too. Our Twitter handles are there, sort of at the end of the presentation. They're pretty easy to find.
I can share those. So yeah, here are our Twitter accounts. I think you can see them now.
Okay. Oh, I see. Yep. Somebody says questions are working. That's what someone says.
Okay, great.
But so there we are.
Okay, so it seems we don't have any questions right now. So thanks a lot for attending this presentation. Yeah, as I said, we will post the slides, and if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the Basecamp or tweet us. We will do the next hangout on May the 17th at the same time. And the topic about for the next hangout will be about dashboards. So we hope to see you there. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.